Hello, everyone. Today we have with us Harjeet Singh. Bhai, I call him Bhai because I met him before as well, and he's Bhai of everyone. So let me introduce him. You might know him already because he's actively working on a lot of issues simultaneously, like be it fossil fuels, climate-induced migration, climate justice, loss and damage, and everything. But his official position, as per his Twitter bio, is that he heads global political strategy at the Climate Action Network International, and he's also global engagement director at Fossil Fuel Treaty. And thank you very much, Harjeet Bhai, for your time. COP27 has ended, and it is said that it was like the longest COP you can say so far because it took more than 2 weeks. So, what are key takeaways of COP27 according to you?
Thank you very much, Mariam, for having me. Pleasure to speak to you. So we're still hearing various kinds of analysis of COP27. Of course, it did not meet our expectations, particularly tackling the issue of fossil fuels, which we all know is the cause of the problem. And the extended talks in Sharm el Sheikh did not deliver the exact language that we were demanding as equitable phase out of all fossil fuels. And even on finance, it was pretty weak because before going to the COP, we knew that rich countries failed again to deliver $100 billion per annum commitment that they made way back in Copenhagen in 2009. And when it comes to adaptation and dealing with loss and damage, which was definitely a priority for all of us in developing countries, and this COP, being an African COP, we wanted to see more progress. So on adaptation, we did not get as much as we wanted. Particularly, we demanded a roadmap on doubling the goal of adaptation finance. But at the same time, on loss and damage, we did get something substantive. At least it's a good beginning to have a loss and damage fund being established. A lot of things are going to unfold, which we'll talk about now. But yes, I think that's a significant way forward to recognize that impacts are happening. And somehow the horrific pictures that we saw from Pakistan floods did make that case very strongly that it's not just island states, it's not just least developed countries, but even bigger developing countries are vulnerable to the scale of climate impacts as we saw in Pakistan or in Nigeria and many other countries. So on loss and damage, I do see a significant step forward.
Talking about loss and damage, because it was like kind of quite big agenda to be included at COP27, and I think hats off to G77 plus China, which Pakistan was leading, Pakistani chairperson was leading. So, I'll come towards like how it's going to work or what is the future. But before that, I would like you to tell us a little bit history for the viewers that from where it started, really this loss and damage.
So the issue of loss and damage, if not the exact phrase, but adverse impacts of climate change, or like convention mentions, adverse effects of climate change. We were very clear about that way back in 1990s. And we knew that some of the impacts are already logged in as temperatures began to rise. And we knew that the carbon emissions of the last 150 years are going to have a long-term effect. And so the island states did ask for some kind of mechanism, but nothing was agreed until 2007, when it was conceptualized as loss and damage in Bali conference. And since then, island states did put forward many proposals. Eventually, in 2012, the global community agreed to have a mechanism next year. Now, 2012 COP in Doha was also quite a turning point because that was the time when we were not making progress on mitigation as Kyoto Protocol first commitment period was coming to an end. Nothing much was happening on finance. And so this was the only thing that happened again in the Doha COP, like it happened in Sharm el Sheikh this year, where eventually next year we achieved Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage. But the reality, Mariam, is that rich countries never allowed a discussion to happen on the issue of loss and damage finance for almost 10 years. And that's why at Glasgow COP 26 last year, we as civil society, as Climate Action Network, with our allies and governments, had to really push for that. It was not even on the agenda last year. So to get it on the agenda and to reach a point where G77 and China recognized this as an issue last year, and which was a step forward. But we knew that rich countries are going to try and kill that again. But thanks to the momentum that was built right from the beginning, again by civil society, and we got a Glasgow dialogue for June, so we all were preparing for that. And in fact, Ambassador Nabil was very much part of our event in the Bonn session, and he did support the issue. But I think the floods in Pakistan, and when things happen at that scale, that was a turning point where, for Pakistan being the chair of G77 in China, saw this as not just as one of the issues to the issue, and really championed. I think that changed everything at Sharm el Sheikh. And of course, I must also acknowledge that the Egyptian presidency did a much better job than the UK government last year in supporting and recognizing that this is an important issue.
So, Harjeet bhai, there are like different analysis which I was going through, as you were also mentioning that there are like different analysis around loss and damage even going on. So there was this one interesting analysis by one of the author working in CANSA, and it said that there's this wording of loss and damage document. It's like kind of bit changed, and it's due to the rich nations because it's really important to focus on terms and terminologies they are going to use, and they are still getting away from legalities, which will be let's see how it's going to be in the future. So what are your views on that?
So when the agenda for loss and damage finance was agreed at the very first day of COP27, rich countries wanted to put a language that this doesn't provide any basis for compensation and liability, which is quite similar to what we got not in the Paris agreement, but a decision that came out of Paris in 2015. And so what rich countries have been trying to make sure that their response to loss and damage should not open floodgates for litigation cases. Although I totally disagree with that, and I think they have misjudged it, because less you cooperate in the UN space, more litigation cases you're going to see, and that's what they did or didn't do for that matter. They did not provide enough support, and that's what they wanted to make sure. But the current draft doesn't refer to compensation or liability for that matter. It was very there only in the agenda. There are a couple of things that they were pushing to agree at this COP, which was not possible. Is who was going to pay for that? And that's where they wanted, countries like China and Gulf states and even India to start paying for loss and damage. And we think that it's kind of resolved, because when we talk about loss and damage, it's not happening because of 20, 30 years of emissions. It is happening because of 150 years of extraction of natural resources. So the first responsibility stays with historical emitters, with G7 countries, and mostly. And then, of course, emissions are increasing from developing countries who are going to be responsible in the future. But for now, rich countries cannot just shift their burden onto developing countries. So that was another issue. And many of the other things have been now moved to next year. In 2023, we are going to have those discussions. But overall, I would say, some of those details we will see being discussed in 2023. But overall, I think it's a landmark decision where all countries agreed to acknowledge the issue of loss and damage finance, which never happened in the last 30 years. and agreeing. So the decision itself is very substantive. It talks about the process, as you mentioned about transitional committee. It has very clear deadlines. It talks about what role other bodies are going to play in terms of mapping finance. So it's not just one paragraph which says we establish loss and damage fund and then without any details. So that's why I'm more confident that it's going to take us to the next level. Of course, not without difficulties, not without challenges that rich countries are going to put forth once again. But overall, it's a step forward.
So, talking about this transitional committee, I mean, do you see that the enough representation of developing countries and these developing islands have been incorporated in that? Do you think because a lot of developing countries are like there's this long list, so I think, do you think that each developing country would be confident enough and would be like focused enough, whatever country is representing in this transitional committee, that it's going to be okay, we are fine with you and you can represent us as a forum or something? How do you see that?
Yeah, I see it's fairly balanced because it is talking about representation from Africa, from Asia Pacific, from Latin America, small island states, least developed countries. So I think it's a fairly comprehensive group which has representation from all regions, and not just regions but also economically weaker countries like least developed countries. So which means that there's more representation from developing countries practically than developed countries. And I think it's absolutely fair and equitable. So it's not that we've just divided into developed and developing countries. It has regional representation and also least developed countries. And this is a decision that has come from G77 and China. So it's quite unanimous, and I think it's absolutely fair.
Cool. So, Harjit bhai, they were like you just mentioned in the beginning as well, like in the past, we did have this Green Climate Fund, then we had Climate Adaptation Fund, and there was this Special Committee Fund as well. So, promises were not fulfilled. So, what do you see the future of this loss and damage fund or facility in the future?
So, one, as I was saying earlier, it's a very substantive decision, which talks about assessing the sources of finance and even mentioning innovative sources of finance, which did not happen earlier in case of other funds. And the, now rich countries cannot say that there are other, other sources of money that are coming in, because the reality on ground speaks for itself. Now, let's take the case of Pakistan. The initial estimates are that the losses are to the tune of $30 billion. We will be able to track how much money actually Pakistan receives now for rehabilitation and reconstruction. Similarly, for Pakistan, for Nigeria or any other country for that matter. So you can't just make promises and not deliver. If you don't deliver, people are going to come back to them and say you have not fulfilled your promise, because the misery of people itself will be a testimony that money has not been provided. So in this case now, they can't just you know promise and then break it. They have to make sure that those commitments are met, and that's why I'm more hopeful. And again, because it's a substantive decision, we are going to follow through. And I would also mention that what we got here um, is also a victory of civil society. The way we worked closely with the governments, make sure that there's pressure on the outside and to hold countries to account, that is something that we will also continue as civil society.
I see. So, Harjit bhai, this is like I'm moving towards the last question. It's a bit of political, but this COP27 and all the COPs are also like in a way political in nature. And there was this interesting debate between different people online, be it social media or in different analysis. When it comes to reporting of a COP, any COP, like let's take the example of COP27 happening in developing world or such regions in Asia or Southeast Asia or African countries or in these regions. And when we compare it with the developed world or rich nations, when that is happening there, we see that reporting is bit, controversial, I can say, because they always try to give controversial angle whenever it's happening in these region. But when it is happening in rich countries, though that controversy is not given, although there are a lot of issues in every region, every country. So how, what are your comments on that?
Well, I would say that the gap of interpretation of whether COP was a success or failure or a mixed bag is now being bridged, because also see international media agencies, for example, picking up the issue of loss and damage into their headline, and saying that it is a positive decision, and also saying that we did not go far enough when it comes to dealing with the cause of the problem, that's fossil fuels. I think that way, many of the coverage that I saw, especially from the international wires and international agencies, it's fairly balanced. I can understand that some of the national media would like to question their own governments and leaders that they did not do enough, which is also right in many ways, because they would look at it from a very national context. For example, if I take the case of the US, so much of appreciation went for the Inflation Reduction Act that President Biden championed, and it is something to be acknowledged. But we, from the international community, don't call the US a leader, because we know that US has not met its financial obligations to developing countries. So we would always judge, a country's leadership by not what they're doing domestically. That's only one part of it, but also what they are doing outside their national borders. So there will always be some difference the way national media is going to look at it, which will have a different focus. But we, from a climate justice perspective, can't just restrict our analysis to national boundaries. So that's always a first step, but not enough. So that's why you see different interpretations depending on who is writing about it or who is analyzing the outcome of COP27.
Well, thank you very much, Harjeet Bhai, and all eyes on COP20, next COP, which is going to happen in Dubai. And let's see what is the future of developing country, and how rich nations are going to gain their trust from the developing countries and least developing countries now. Thank you very much for your time.